In the house of this woman's parents, the atmosphere was tense, and it was about to reach a breaking point as they discussed her brother's upcoming wedding. He had boldly declared that even if he earned 100 million a month, it wouldn't be enough for her family. The statement had left everyone in the room on edge. With displeasure, the woman asked Yeonmu to clarify the amount he had mentioned, and then questioned whether he considered her family his family too. He couldn't help but wonder if he was so selfish that he couldn't take care of his own family. Yeonmu, however, found humor in her words and burst into laughter, closing his eyes. Unbeknownst to him, blood was flowing down his face from a head injury inflicted by a flying glass earlier. He retorted, expressing his frustration with such relatives and essentially telling them to go to hell. The woman responded with a shocking suggestion, telling Yeonmu that if he was so fed up with everything, he could just end it all by dying. Yeonmu, taken aback, asked if she truly believed he couldn't do it. The woman, maintaining her composure, asked if he genuinely wanted to die, and suggested that he wait until she bought accident insurance, making light of the situation. Frowning and observing how cruel she appeared, Yeonmu looked at Fang Yuxue and commented that everything was just fine. He decided to make a hasty exit, with the woman's loud cries echoing behind him, rushed to the window. In a moment of desperation, he flew out of it, plummeting to the ground. As Yeonmu descended, he contemplated that his life was coming to an end. Clutched in his hand was a piece of paper that had been with him throughout this bizarre encounter. It held the grim diagnosis of stage 4 stomach cancer from July 2009. 5 people had been in the room during this ordeal, 4 comfortably seated on a sofa, and Yeonmu kneeling in front of them. A woman with a short haircut inquired about his sudden kneeling, and a blonde man in the corner of the sofa humorously suggested it might be a tradition in Yeonmu's family. It was at that moment that Yeonmu realized his position, kneeling in front of these people, but most importantly, he was still alive. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What would you do with $1 million? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now, back to the recap. The woman crossed her arms, commenting on Yeonmu's words, and advised him not to make a fool of himself. Yeonmu, gathering his courage, raised his head and hesitantly addressed her as Mom. Her response was unexpected. She calmly questioned who he was calling Mom and stated that he would need to add an additional 400,000 to the bride price before earning the right to call her that. Yeonmu was taken aback, wondering if she was talking about a ransom. It was then that he realized he had somehow traveled back 8 years, to the moment when he had proposed to Fang Yuxue. The woman continued to insist on the 400,000 addition to the bride price, leaving Yeonmu with no choice but to accept this bizarre twist of fate. Getting up from his knees, Yeonmu stood resolute, determined to make amends for the mistakes of his previous life, where he had become entangled with the blood-sucking Fang family. The smiling guy seemed to be in agreement, which initially brought joy to the woman. Her demeanor softened, and she asked if Yeonmu agreed to her condition. However, Yeonmu's response was unexpected. He shouted defiantly that he didn't agree to a damn thing. In his mind, he was already planning to start anew, vowing never to repeat the errors of his past. The woman, startled by his response, leaped from her seat and demanded an explanation. Did he truly believe her daughter wasn't worth $1 million? Fang Yuxue, who had been watching silently with a frown, finally spoke up. She stood up and asked how Yeonmu could do this to her and her family. Yeonmu, undeterred, pressed further, asking if she was being married or sold. Fang Yuxue, appearing upset and confused, explained that it was not easy for her parents to raise her, so it was only fair to pay a bride price. Yeonmu then inquired about what Fang Yuxue herself would give him in return, pointing out her brother's financial dependency. The brother, clearly offended, jumped up in anger, demanding who Yeonmu had dared to call a loser. Yeonmu remained calm and unflinching, labeling the brother a complete jerk who couldn't do anything. As the brother threw a punch in retaliation, Yeonmu skillfully dodged the blow and restrained him. The mother of the family screamed in outrage, calling Yeonmu a bastard, insisting that he release her son, emphasizing that they were family. Yeonmu, however, pointed out that there hadn't been a wedding yet, meaning that Fang Yuxue's brother was not his family member. The brother stood up, resolute, and declared that he wanted nothing more to do with the Fan family. Fang Yuxue turned to Yeonmu, questioning the value of their relationship. Yeonmu countered by asking if she had ever considered how hard his parents had to work to earn 500,000 in his previous life as a ransom. He recounted the story of his father, who had resorted to buying a lottery ticket and unexpectedly won 500,000, only to suffer a nervous breakdown as a result of the money. As Yeonmu left the tumultuous family behind, his parting words were a declaration that they needed the cash cow, not him. On the street, he approached a building adorned with a sign advertising the Social Security lottery. The ad announced a whopping first prize fund of 100 million yuan for the lottery. To Yeonmu, this seemed like an auspicious start, especially since his father's lucky number in the past had contained the number 100 million. With these thoughts in mind, Yanmu entered the building and purchased a lottery ticket. The cashier informed him that the lottery draw was scheduled for 9:50 p.m. that night. While on the street, Yanmu spotted his father nearby. His father rubbed his eyes and questioned whether he had just seen Yanmu. Had he not gone to the Feng family earlier? Yanmu watched his father with a heavy heart, assuming that his father had endured yet another disappointing lunch. Father, as he passed by, expressed his hope that winning the lottery would spare him from worrying about the bride price for his son, prayed for divine intervention, believing that this time he must be lucky. Yanmu made a solemn decision not to let his parents suffer any longer from that day forward. Suddenly, he received a mysterious congratulatory notification, congratulating him on successfully binding with the system of the god of the eyes of the moon. The system presented him with a daunting task: accumulate 100 million in assets and own his own company within 24 hours. There were only 21 hours remaining before the task's completion deadline, and the system warned him to take it seriously, as his life hung in the balance with just one life point remaining. Confused and bewildered, Yanmu couldn't comprehend what was happening. Back at home, he discussed these strange events with the system and questioned whether it was all just a cruel joke. He couldn't ignore the mysterious moon eye mark now present on his arm. Suddenly, Yanmu heard a familiar voice from outside. Someone was demanding an explanation and telling someone to release Yanmu. Yanmu recognized the voice and was surprised to hear it. It was Meng Yao. Memories of their childhood flooded his mind. Meng Yao had been his friend since they were kids, and she had always been like a younger sister to him. In a previous life, Meng Yao's family had been in dire financial straits due to her mother's gambling addiction. Yanmu had temporarily housed Meng Yao's family when they couldn't pay their debts, but he had failed to answer her call while he was with the Fan family. Tragically, they had been killed by creditors, and he had even visited their graves. In this life, Yanmu was determined to protect her. Outside, two guys were molesting Meng Yao. One of them pinned her against the wall, while the other touched her inappropriately, challenging her to scream for help. The second assailant had her phone and demanded to know who she intended to call. Yanmu couldn't stand by and watch. He confronted the two men, striking one of them so hard that he collided with his partner, causing the phone to fall. Meng Yao, with tears in her eyes, rushed into Yanmu's arms, relieved and grateful. The guy who had been slapped was holding his nose, seething with anger at the audacity of someone hitting him. The second assailant, believing Yanmu was defenseless, intended to attack with a weapon, but Meng Yao, sensing the danger, warned Yanmu to be careful. Yanmu reacted swiftly, twisting the attacker's arm, causing him to scream in pain. The first guy, who had been slapped earlier, stood there, fuming over the fact that Yanmu had dared to hit his brother. He now brandished a knife with menacing intent. Yanmu stood his ground, positioning himself protectively in front of Meng Yao, and addressed the assailants, inquiring if they were after money. He warned them that they would never get anything if they took a single step closer to him and Meng Yao. The situation had escalated to a dangerous standoff, with tension hanging in the air. One of the guys immediately asked if Yanmu had any money, while another turned to his brother and suggested that Yanmu, despite his appearance, might be a resource they needed. Brandishing the knife, the blonde man inquired if Yanmu knew how much money they owed. He quickly stated the staggering sum of 500,000. Did Yanmu have that kind of money? In response, Yanmu raised his hand, showing 3 fingers, and confidently declared that he could gather 500,000 within 3 days. However, the blonde man added another request. His brother's medical bills, totaling 100,000, needed to be included in that amount. His injured brother stood behind him, nursing his wounded hand from their earlier fight. As the discussion continued, the blonde man's face darkened. He warned that if Yanmu failed to deliver the money within the agreed-upon time frame, they would force Meng Yao to repay her debt. With a threatening gesture, he pointed at Meng Yao. Yanmu firmly placed his hand on Meng Yao's shoulder and asserted that he would bring the money in 3 days, but the guys would have to beg for forgiveness on their knees in front of her. Defiantly, the departing guy shouted that their boss was the director of a real estate company, and if Yanmu failed to deliver the money, the boss would personally exact dire consequences, including harm to Yanmu's legs. This mention of the real estate company of Futa was another message from the mysterious system. The system reminded Yanmu that there were only 20 hours left to complete the mission and stressed the importance of finishing it promptly. It also mentioned that Yanmu's life was now linked to survival points. The points dwindled. He would experience adverse symptoms. Currently, he had only 1 life point. As the gravity of the situation settled in, Yanmu couldn't help but worry about his life being controlled by these virtual glasses. Meng Yao, who stood next to him, blamed herself for attracting trouble and dragging him into the situation. Yanmu reassured her, gently stroking her head and telling her not to worry about money. He would handle it in 3 days. Suddenly, one of the guy's condition deteriorated. He felt dizzy and touched Meng Yao's shoulder for support before collapsing onto her. Yanmu, bewildered and frustrated, realized that these were the random symptoms mentioned in the system's notification. Meng Yao asked about his well-being. Yanmu explained that he hadn't eaten all day, attributing his weakness to that. She promised to fetch him something to eat. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the Fong family household, where the entire family was engaged in a discussion. Fong Yushue's mother inquired about the progress with Yanmu and whether Meng Yao had received a response to her call. Fong Yushue shook her head, stating that Yanmu hadn't answered yet. The father, frustrated, jumped up from the sofa and scolded Fong Yushue, calling her useless for not being able to control a man. The mother intervened, protecting her daughter from her husband's anger, inquired where Yanmu was in such a hurry. She expressed her concern, mentioning that Yanmu wasn't acting like himself today. The father pondered the situation, stroking his chin, and wondered what could have caused Yanmu's sudden change in behavior. Both parents suggested that Yanmu might have become wealthy, and the father urged Fong Yushui to keep Yanmu close for her own happiness, as another girl might snatch him away. He contemplated the possibility of increasing the bride price if Yanmu indeed became rich, envisioning all of Yanmu's money belonging to the family. The mother concurred, advising Fong Yushui to remember Yanmu's disrespectful behavior toward her brother and how he had talked to him. The daughter reluctantly agreed with her family's decision, and as she left, she couldn't help but wonder if Yanmu was hiding something from her. She had a sinking feeling that he was keeping secrets from her, something he would have never done before. Meanwhile, Meng Yao sat at the table with plates of food, and Yanmu offered her another plate, encouraging her to eat more fruit. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Meng Yao got up to answer it. Fong Yuxue stood on the threshold, demanding an explanation from Yanmu for everything that had transpired. She entered the room and confronted Yanmu, seeking clarification. She wanted to understand why he had distanced himself from her. Yanmu turned his gaze toward Meng Yao and, with an air of indifference, asked Fong Yuxue why she was there. He explained that they no longer had anything in common, emphasizing that he had made that clear. He questioned if her persistent mother had not given up yet. Fong Yushue's words left Meng Yao in shock, and she began to question Yanmu, accusing him of dating someone else and changing his mind due to increased bride price demands. With a resigned sigh, Yanmu replied that it wasn't about the bride price. It was simply that there was nothing left between them after dating for so long. Realizing the futility of the situation, Yanmu offered Meng Yao a piece of advice. She should leave her home as soon as possible if she wanted to regain her freedom. As Fong Yushui left in anger, she hurled insults and curses at Yanmu, vowing to make him regret what had happened. Meng Yao looked at her brother with concern, wondering what had transpired between him and Fong Yushui. She believed that Meng Yao and Fong Yushui loved each other, so she couldn't fathom why their relationship had suddenly unraveled. Yanmu remained silent about the situation, and prepared to leave, mentioning that he might not be back for the day. He allowed Meng Yao to stay the night at his place. As he stepped out, he contemplated the difficult decision he had made to let go of a relationship that had lasted for so many years. He planned to explore business opportunities and set off into the city. Out in the bustling streets of the city, Yanmu observed a crowd gathered in one place. From snippets of conversations around him, it became apparent that someone in the crowd had won the third prize in the lottery. It was also revealed that there was only one digit difference between the third and first prize numbers. Yanmu speculated that perhaps his father had also come to claim a prize. Gray-haired and stammering, Yanmu's father expressed his simple desire for his son to buy a house and get married. Complexities of relationships and wealth seemed distant from his earnest wish for Yanmu's happiness. Hiding behind a newspaper, Yanmu felt fortunate. He had finished cashing his lottery prize earlier in the lottery building. This would likely spare him from some of the problems he anticipated with the group of reporters swarming around. He stood under a street lamp, leaning against a pole, reading the newspaper while contemplating his plans. The headline caught his attention. Food real estate company is facing bankruptcy. What is the future of real estate? Yanmu recognized this as a sign. It seemed like the food real estate company was on the brink of collapse, but he saw it as an opportunity. Thought of buying out the struggling company and turning its fortunes around intrigued him. He believed that if he could acquire this enterprise, he could become the wealthiest person in the city within a few years. It was his chance to amass a significant fortune. At 9:20 a.m., Yanmu arrived at the food real estate company's location, but he was surprised to find a sizable crowd still gathered there. He wondered why so many people were present if the company was indeed on the verge of bankruptcy. Had someone else beaten him to it? The system sent Yanmu another notification, warning him that there was only 1 hour left before the task completion deadline. He needed to complete the task quickly, or he would risk losing his life. The system also reminded him of his few remaining life points, which meant that his body might experience random adverse symptoms. As Yanmu felt a sudden pain, He instinctively pressed his hand against the affected area. It was his heart. He realized that he needed to finish this task promptly to avoid further complications. Meanwhile, workers passing by shouted, requesting space as they carried a banner. Curious, Yanmu asked the workers about the situation. A man in a helmet explained that the workers were on strike because their wages had been delayed for nearly 6 months. Yanmu understood that such delays were not uncommon in the construction industry, which often led to protests. Another worker added that they had heard that the head director had absconded with all the money, leaving the second director, Kong Rui, heavily in debt. Consequently, there were no funds available to pay their wages. Everyone was demanding answers and, at the very least, some compensation. Yanmu was astonished by the information he had just heard from the workers. He asked them if it was confirmed that the head director had indeed escaped. One of the workers confirmed that this information came directly from the company itself. According to him, Kong Rui, the second director, was expected to arrive today, and the workers were blocking everything in protest. Despite the dwindling time, Yanmu didn't want to give up on his chance to complete the task and extend his life. He desperately wanted to survive longer in this new life. As he approached the growing crowd of workers and protesters, he saw that they were becoming increasingly agitated. A car pulled up in the midst of the crowd, and people shouted at Kong Rui, demanding that he return the money owed to them. The banner they held reiterated this demand. However, the unscrupulous boss, sitting in the car, responded with insults, referring to the protesters as smelly peasants and rabid dogs. He seemed dismissive of their grievances, considering them beneath him. Li Biao, Kong Rui's bodyguard, who was 35 years old, shared his boss's disdain for the crowd. He suggested that they should contact some influential people to handle the situation, believing that the protesters would lose their resolve with a good lesson. Kong Rui, the chief director of the food company at 40 years old, sat in silence, seemingly resigned to the situation. Suddenly, someone knocked on the car window. It was Yanmu. Even Li Biao was taken aback and cursed upon seeing Yanmu's face as he peered through the glass. Yanmu received another time alert, indicating that there were only 25 minutes left until the end of the task. In a moment, Yanmu managed to get inside the car. Li Biao attempted to push Yanmu out, demanding to know how he had entered. He told Yanmu to leave immediately, but Yanmu remained resolute. He turned to Director Kong and stated that he had important business to discuss with him. Li Biao, infuriated, warned Yanmu to leave, but Yanmu calmly continued, explaining that what he was about to say could determine whether or not Director Kong would spend the rest of his life in prison. Yanmu had entered the situation with the determination to influence its outcome. Yanmu, undeterred by Li Biao's threats and curses, repeated his question about whether they really wanted him to leave. He pointed out that Yanmu was being associated with the people on the street who were demanding money. Kong Rui, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. He expressed his dissatisfaction with the wage delays and claimed to have already devised a plan to resolve the issue. However, Yanmu quickly clarified his true purpose for being there. He explained that he wasn't seeking money, but rather offering it to Director Kong. He proposed to help Kong Rui recover all of his financial losses, including unpaid wages. Additionally, Yanmu intended to buy out the food real estate company and become its director. Kong Rui was taken aback by this unexpected offer and removed his sunglasses, his eyes filled with confusion. He asked Yanmu to elaborate on his proposal. Seemingly intrigued, Yanmu assured him that he had the resources to handle the financial aspects efficiently. He requested that Director Kong specify the amount needed to resolve the situation, as the system issued another alert, indicating only 10 minutes remained until the task deadline. Kong Rui responded that Yanmu would need 50 million for this endeavor. Yanmu, finding the amount surprisingly low, repeated the figure with a hint of displeasure. Enraged by Yanmu's reaction, Kong Rui accused him of teasing and ordered Li Biao to eject Yanmu from the car. Li Biao, fueled by anger, grabbed Yanmu's clothes and attempted to forcefully remove him from the vehicle. However, Yanmu swiftly subdued the bodyguard, pinning him to the seat. Kong Rui observed this unexpected turn of events. Noting Yanmu's attire and martial skills, he realized that Yanmu was not to be underestimated, considering that he had just defeated Li Biao. With a calming gesture, Kong Rui intervened and asked Li Biao to wait. Kong Rui acknowledged that he currently lacked the funds to pay the workers and didn't have the time for a prolonged confrontation. He decided to entertain Yanmu's proposition, recognizing that Yanmu wanted to purchase his company. Yanmu assured Kong Rui that he was serious about purchasing the land and was willing to pay the 50 million yuan without hesitation. He even expressed his willingness to make the payment immediately. Yanmu knew that the news had mentioned that Kong Rui owned multiple plots of land in the area, and acquiring them all would be a strategic move to maximize future profits. Kong Rui was initially taken aback by Yanmu's offer, wondering if it was a joke. He was cautious, as giving in to his emotions could lead to the loss of valuable land. However, Yanmu's seriousness convinced Kong Rui that this might be an opportunity to relieve himself of his immense debts. As the deadline approached, Yanmu emphasized the urgency of the situation. With only 5 minutes left, Kong Rui asked once more if Yanmu's intentions were genuine. Li Biao, bodyguard, found it incredulous that Yanmu was willing to pay a high price for the land, but Yanmu remained resolute. The system issued another message announcing that there were only 3 minutes left until the task deadline. Yanmu's senses were fading rapidly due to the impending penalty, but he was determined to complete the transaction with Kong Rui. Kong Rui proposed a price of 20 million yuan for the land, and Yanmu, despite his deteriorating condition, managed to agree to the terms. He urgently requested to proceed with the registration. Yanmu was aware that time was running out, and he needed to sign the contract before the countdown reached 0. The stakes were high, and he couldn't afford to fail. Yanmu found himself in a precarious situation, struggling to see clearly as a credit card materialized in his trembling hand. It was the means by which he had to pay for the crucial purchase they were making. Kong Rui, his face etched with worry, observed the unfolding events with a sinking heart. The tension in the air was palpable. 5 seconds, 4 seconds. The countdown mercilessly ticked away. Yanmu's heart pounded in his chest as he successfully completed the payment with just 3 seconds to spare. The relentless countdown came to an abrupt halt, and a wave of exhaustion washed over him. Yanmu, sitting beside him, contemplated in silence, pondering the absence of any indication from the system that the time had expired. It seemed miraculously that he had succeeded. Kong Rui sat there, a relieved smile spreading across his face. He glanced at the individual who had just purchased his land, a sense of relief washing over him. For some reason, Yanmu still felt as though his strength was slowly ebbing away. His life had only just begun. How could he face death once more? Just then, a message arrived from the system, congratulating Yanmu on the successful completion of the starting task. Awards had been granted for passing, including 10 life points and 3 additional bonus survival points. Furthermore, the first level of the trading system had been unlocked. Yanmu now had a total of 13 life points at his disposal. With a sigh of relief, Yanmu allowed himself to get lost in the message from the system. He learned that life points were awarded based on income, investments, and rewards for completing system tasks. These points were crucial, as they covered survival costs at a rate of 1 point per day. The more life points one possessed, the better their overall health. Yanmu also discovered that these points could be used to purchase items in the system's store. Meanwhile, chaos reigned outside. Angry shouts filled the air as an irate man threatened that no one would be allowed to leave until they received their payment. Suddenly, a projectile hurled by the disgruntled man smashed through the car window, leaving Mr. Kong in a state of shock. The people outside were growing increasingly agitated and willing to let Kong Rui and his group off the hook. Li Biao, who had been sitting in the seat next to the driver, turned to the boss with concern. He asked for guidance on how to proceed and offered to contact individuals who could handle the situation by eliminating those causing discomfort to Kong Rui. Kong Rui turned to Yanmu, seeking his advice on the matter. Yanmu suggested that, since the money had already been received, Kong Rui could simply transfer the workers' wages directly. As he considered the situation, Yanmu also reflected on his own physical recovery. With only 13 life points remaining, he had a limited time, 13 days to be precise, before he needed to secure more. He wasn't sure when the next system task would arise, so finding a way to accumulate life points independently was a pressing concern. Kong Rui instructed Li Biao to follow Yanmu's advice. He urged Li Biao to inform the people outside that the money would be transferred to them later that night. After receiving the instructions, Li Biao opened the hatch on the car's roof and leaned out, holding a loudspeaker in his hand. With Li Biao's guidance, the crowd outside was called to attention. He conveyed Kong Rui's message that everyone would receive their wages later in the evening. The workers, who had been eagerly anticipating their overdue payments, began to murmur among themselves. The prospect of finally receiving the money that had been delayed for 6 long months stirred a mix of hope and skepticism. Some among them reasoned that it might be worth giving the management one last chance, as avoiding the situation altogether seemed unlikely. In a collective decision, they agreed to disperse for now and return in the evening to collect their earnings if Kong Rui's promise turned out to be genuine. Once the workers had left, Li Biao reported to Kong Rui, awaiting further instructions. Kong Rui determined that their next step was to return to the office and involve Mr. Young in their plans. Upon reaching the food real estate company's building, Yanmu found himself standing beside a vast map of Junction City displayed on the wall. Kong Rui approached him, holding out their planning book. However, Yanmu declined the book, opting instead to take a marker and circle certain territories on the map. He pointed to one particular area, stating that it should not remain vacant, as there was no need to construct buildings on it. He indicated plots of land that needed to be acquired, asserting that they should not be left undeveloped. Yeonmu's next move elicited an unexpected reaction from Kong Rui, who expressed concerns about a piece of land in the eastern part of the city, dismissing it as remote and situated in a desolate area. Despite its affordability, he questioned its practical value, suggesting that no one would even take it for free. Yeonmu reassured Kong Rui, explaining that he had insider information about the future development of the East. He anticipated the establishment of several new schools in that vicinity, making it an ideal location for a commercial zone. He elaborated on his vision, detailing plans for a large shopping center, specialty restaurants, a snack bar, a bookstore, and a stylish hotel. Yeonmu emphasized the importance of a modern design for the buildings. With this ambitious plan in mind, Kong Rui was tasked with finding a reliable and high-quality construction team. Yeonmu patted him on the shoulder, assuring him that if he followed through, he would be treated well as the new boss. Kong Rui accepted the responsibility, pledging to execute Yeonmu's instructions diligently. Kong Rui had to place his trust in Yeonmu's decisions as they continued with their plans. He promptly informed Mr. Young about an upcoming investment meeting set to take place at the Jingpong Hotel that night. Rumors had it that intriguing projects would be discussed at the event, and Kong Rui offered to accompany Yeonmu there if he was interested. Yeonmu pondered the potential benefits of attending the investment meeting, recognizing that life points were awarded based on income and investments. Successful investments could potentially yield a significant number of life points, a valuable resource. In the evening, Yeonmu arrived at the Jingpang Hotel and approached the reception desk. He inquired about the floor where the investment meeting was scheduled to take place. Not far behind him, a young woman named Mrs. Fang stood, catching his attention. Without turning to face her, Yeonmu couldn't help but wonder why she was there. He mentally questioned her presence, contemplating her role in this situation. She appeared to be standing meekly, shrinking away, as a man placed his hand on her shoulder and commented on her enhanced beauty compared to 3 months ago. The girl remained silent, her thoughts drifting to the bride price Yeonmu had recently given to her parents. He wished she didn't have to endure the company of this unpleasant man. He drew her closer and asked how she could be preoccupied with something else when he was present. He offered to assist her, but something else soon captured the girl's attention. Yeonmu discreetly observed her, noticing her discomfort. She averted her gaze and appeared despondent. The man accompanying her began to suspect a connection between Yeonmu and Mrs. Fan, considering their interactions. Yeonmu had recently broken up with her, and yet she was now in the company of another man, dressed provocatively. However, Yeonmu quickly dismissed any involvement in her affairs, understanding that their relationship was no longer his concern. As Yeonmu navigated through the hotel, he accidentally bumped shoulders with the man accompanying Fang Yushue. He turned to the man and inquired about his actions. The man, crossing his arms and exuding arrogance, stated that Yeonmu had been blocking the path of others. Fang Yushue stood silently, her gaze averted. The man continued to provoke Yeonmu, poking him and questioning his awareness of the place they were in. He condescendingly remarked that such a location was not suitable for someone of Yeonmu's humble status. Yeonmu, unfazed by the provocations, ignored his words and turned his attention to Fang Yushue, asking about her choice of attire for the day. The ignored man grew increasingly agitated, questioning how Yeonmu could dare to ignore him without knowing who he was. The confrontational man continued his taunts, questioning Yeonmu's audacity to be with someone else's girlfriend right in front of him. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out at ID 8461 who commented, "Keep it up. Voices like this are good," on our future journal video. Thanks for commenting. Yeonmu, seemingly unperturbed by the man's comments, directed his attention to Fang Yushue, inquiring about her relationship with the man. She responded curtly, stating that it was none of Yeonmu's business. This response pleased the man, who took it as a victory. He reminded Yeonmu of Fang Yushue's response, suggesting that Yeonmu could only dream of being with someone as beautiful as her. Yeonmu, watching the departing figures of Fang Yushue and her companion, clenched his fists tightly. He realized that Fang Yushue had changed from the simple and kind girl he once knew. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that their relationship was now in the past, and he needed to move on. The investment meeting was scheduled to take place on the 14th floor of the hotel, and Yeonmu headed there. A new system task had just arrived, offering the opportunity to earn 10 life points. This task required Yeonmu to sign a business investment contract. Recognizing the complexity of this task, Kong Rui had prepared by researching some businesses that had thrived in Yeonmu's past life, which he believed would be advantageous. However, as Yanmu attempted to enter the hotel, a guard stationed at the entrance questioned his haste and his knowledge of the event. The guard emphasized that outsiders were typically not allowed entry and explained that the attendees were wealthy and held high-ranking positions. He expressed doubt about Yanmu's eligibility to enter the event. Growing frustrated, Yanmu claimed that he too was there to invest in a business, but the guard persisted, commenting on Yanmu's attire, implying that he didn't look like a legitimate businessman. Yanmu began to wonder if investors were judged by their clothing. Just as the situation became more tense, the guard greeted someone approaching from behind Yanmu. It was Mr. Ma, the same man who had arrived earlier with Fang Yuxue. Mr. Ma recognized Yanmu as the young man he had encountered on the first floor. He turned to the guard and asked if they couldn't resolve the matter with a few words. The guard, with a chuckle, admitted that he didn't know where Yanmu had come from, but felt that he was not receptive to reasonable conversation. The guard reported that Yanmu had claimed to be an investor, but it was hard to believe. Mr. Ma chuckled at the idea and turned to Yanmu, questioning whether he was truly there to invest. With a firm tone, he advised Yanmu to go and earn some money for a decent suit, and he also cautioned him not to draw unnecessary attention in such places. Mr. Ma placed his hand on Yanmu's shoulder, offering advice that audacity could be useful in courting a girl, but not in these settings. He emphasized that arrogance alone was insufficient. One needed to have money. Mr. Ma asked Yanmu if that was what he wanted. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.